Hey guys, what's up? It's Eric with Advanced Level Automotive. You know what time it is. It's time to put the wiring harness in the Corvette. All right guys, so if you've been following the channel for a while, it's probably a good chance you know all about this Corvette right behind me. And if you're new, make sure you subscribe. Anyway, so for those who don't know, right behind me, I have a 1999 Chevrolet Corvette. This thing's got a big old honking 5.7 liter V8 engine. And if you guys couldn't already tell, this thing's been used and abused. Anyways, the customer wants to see if we can get this thing running again, just to get it drivable, probably so he can continue abusing it, which is kind of sad if you ask me. So if you guys watched the first video, you already know this thing needs a wiring harness. We were able to locate one. All right, so over here we have the wiring harness, and it's pretty much laid out the way it's gonna go into the vehicle. Right over here is where it's gonna connect to the computer. So we have these two connectors that go to the computer. This big connector is gonna go to the fuse box, and there's a few other connectors down there which are located in this area. The engine computer is actually located right here in the fender well. So the harness runs up through here. Again, this is the fuse block. This is where it's going to connect to. There's a few other connectors right down here. And then the wiring harness is going to run up and over behind the intake manifold. And we have this part of the wiring harness that goes over this valve cover that connects to the coils right here and the injectors. And then the same on the other side of the intake manifold. And if I show you on the wiring harness, so we're going from the computer fuse box over to the intake manifold. This goes on the passenger side of the intake manifold, and we have the connector for the coils and the injector connectors right here. And then this is going to go on the other side of the intake manifold right here. And if you look, injector connectors, the ignition coil connector, then we have the connector or the wire to the alternator and the connector for the alternator. And then these wires that extend down here, I believe this may go to the crankshaft position sensor if I'm not mistaken. And then over here we have the harness that goes behind the engine, and it's got the connector for the O2 sensor. It's got this other connector, I'm not really sure what it's for, and a few other connectors. Then this right here goes behind the intake manifold, and we have a connector, I believe this is for the camshaft position sensor if I'm not mistaken, and oil pressure sensor. And then we have the O2 sensor connector, which I may actually have to take off of the other harness. So some of these connectors are broken. This is a used wiring harness, so I may have to cut off a few pieces from the old one and move it over to the new one. And I believe in this case we may have to remove the intake manifold to get to the harness on the backside, because there really is no room between the firewall and the intake manifold. So yeah, I think first things first, let's go ahead and pull this wheel off, pull the fender liner off, and see if we can get to the engine computer. Check out these brakes. Look how much pad is left. Right in there. This thing's pretty much gonna need new brakes. Probably all around. I mean, I don't know if we can get rid of this surface rust, but yeah, it's definitely gonna need some brakes. Anyway, so we're gonna go ahead and remove this panel, and the ECM should be right behind here. All right, so now that we have the cover off, you can see this is where the ECM is located, and it's mounted inside of this bracket here, which I believe there's two bolts, one on each side, that we need to remove in order to open up this bracket. But if you can see from the bottom, you'll see the two main connectors right here for the ECM. So there's a couple of looks like 8mm bolts we're gonna have to remove, and then we can pull these two connectors off. So let's go ahead and do that. All right guys, so now that we have the bracket loose for the ECM, we can go ahead and pull on the ECM, flip it around, get all this dirt off here. I'm gonna go ahead and take the two screws off for the connectors. They're actually 7mm, so let's go ahead and get these off. We kind of shake that dirt off. Lots of dirt in here. one of them. And the second one. Now I can go ahead and pull these connectors off. And we have the ECM right here. And these are our two connectors. You got to be careful because these weather stripping pieces tend to fall off, so you don't want to lose these. Make sure you put them back into the connector. We're replacing this harness, and I don't even think it came with them, so we're going to reuse these. Okay, now looking at this thing, looks like this harness runs up through here behind the battery tray and up over here above the fender liner, which I'm not even really sure about this fender liner because it looks like it's made out of fiberglass. Let me show you over here on this side. Looking at this fender liner on this side, you can see what I'm talking about. Kind of looks like this fender liner is made out of fiberglass, so it feels like a pretty solid piece. I'm not sure if it's that easy to remove. So I think what we're gonna do is go ahead and maybe remove the battery tray, try to follow this harness up and see if we can disconnect it from up there. All right, now looking over here from the top, we've already got the battery disconnected, which was actually the first thing I did. Forgot to mention that. Let me just go ahead and remove the battery. It's really not even bolted down. All right, now looking in the area where the battery was, this is the battery tray here. You can actually see that the harness comes up through here, and there's a couple of connectors that are attached to the wiring harness. These two round connectors right here are part of the wiring harness that we're replacing. So I do believe we may have to remove this battery tray, but looking at this thing, looks like there's 3 bolts in here, but they're pretty rusted. So hopefully those things come out without any trouble. Also, we are gonna have to remove the fuse box because the connector that goes underneath, so this is gonna have to come out so that we can replace that connector. All right, guys, so I was able to remove the battery tray. Just had to use a little bit of PB Blaster penetrant fluid on those rusted bolts, but they came out pretty easy. Now, if we look down here where the battery tray was, now we can see everything. So looking over here, this is the wiring harness that comes from the computer, runs over this way. Again, we have a couple connectors that branch off the harness that connect to these 2 gray connectors here. And then we have the part of the harness that branches off and goes to this fuse box. So we're gonna go ahead and remove the fuse box. And then if you look over here, if you follow the wiring harness, it runs over there. And, oh, hey. I found a socket. Finders keepers. Looks like a 9/16. Well, we don't really use these too often. In the garbage can. Oh, I completely missed that. Now it actually looks like this piece, it's not really attached to anything, so I think I can just pull it right off. Oh yeah, there you go. Nice. Now I can see it even more. Now one thing I don't like is if I follow this wiring harness back, it actually looks like it goes to the starter motor. So I may actually have to remove the starter motor, but this thing has these aftermarket long tube headers. So that starter motor is probably gonna be a real pain in the you-know-what to get it out. I may end up having to remove these headers. As you can tell, they look pretty rusted, so hopefully none of these bolts break when I go to remove them. But I guess first things first, let me go ahead and get this fuse box out and see if I can start pulling the wiring harness out through here. All right, guys, so I managed to pull this part of the wiring harness up and out. And as you can see, these are the 2 connectors for the ECM right here. And this is the connector for the fuse box right here. But one interesting thing that I found when I was pulling the harness up, I thought that there was only 2 connectors down there, which were the 2 for the ECM. Because when I looked at the used wiring harness that we got, it looks like there's only just the 2 ECM connectors. But as I was pulling it up, I actually found that this right here was connected to that control module that's part of the bracket that goes in front of the ECM. So I had to disconnect this. Well, then I was curious, why does this one have this leg of the harness for the connector for that module alongside these two ECM connectors? So let me show you the harness that we got. So again, it's laid out like it's pretty much laid out on the vehicle. We have the two ECM connectors right here. And if you look right over here, where the other leg of the harness branches off, you'll actually see that they sliced it off. Well, that's gonna suck because I'm gonna have to cut the harness, or that part of the harness, off the old one and attach it to this one. All right, so moving back to the vehicle, I think before I try to attack the intake manifold, I want to raise up the vehicle and I want to see if we can attack the starter first. All right, guys, so we got this thing up in the air. I'm really not even sure where to begin with this one because disaster is kind of an understatement. Oh my gosh. I'm not really sure what I got myself into here. This car is on the next level of needing some help. I mean, just looking underneath, I mean, all of this stuff, I'm not even really sure what the hell all of this is. We've got loose connectors. We've got wiring harnesses laying everywhere. We have loose fitting stuff. I mean, we've got giant oil leaks. I'm not really sure where the oil leak's coming from because there's oil everywhere. And it left a pretty big oil spot over here, and where it was parked in the front of the shop, it left a huge oil spot. So yeah, we've got some major oil leak problems. If you look all on the front, we have oil pretty much everywhere. I mean, this is a pretty bad leak. I mean, just looking at this thing, wow, look at this belt. That's not even on there straight. That belt looks like it's getting ready to come off. Anyway, so going back to the starter motor, again, this thing has long tube headers. And looking up in here, you can see the starter is buried in here. And I don't even know if you can see the starter bolt. Looks like the starter bolt is right in there, one of them. So in order for me to even get to that starter, I'm gonna have to remove this rusted up long tube header. I can see part of the wiring harness. What is a connector? There's two connectors. You can see they're both melted. It's an oxygen sensor connector, and I'm not even really sure what this went to, but this is completely melted. So yeah, we're gonna have to replace this wiring harness here. Now looking over here, two oxygen sensors. They have the wiring harness is cut off, but those are the downstream, so those really don't matter because there's no catalytic converters on this vehicle. As long as it's got the upstream oxygen sensors, which this is the part of the wiring harness right here that is really badly burned up. So if you look up in here, hopefully you guys can see how that wiring harness is completely cooked. Yeah, you can see this connector for the oxygen sensor is completely burned on both ends. The harness that comes from the oxygen sensor and the other side that comes from the vehicle. Man, look at that. That's the two connectors melted together. Let me show you guys. You can see the terminals in there. Look how cooked that thing is. Oh yeah, so anyways, it's gonna need a new oxygen sensor here. Oxygen sensor is located somewhere. Where is it? Man, I can't even see this oxygen sensor. This header is gonna have to come off too. And looking at this side, they didn't even bother to put the oxygen sensor in the bung hole here. Yeah, that's what it's called. It's called a bung hole. Now looking at this thing, I'm not even really sure if there's enough space here to have an oxygen sensor. So that may actually be a problem. But man, this wiring harness, it's pretty bad. I mean, you guys can see, well actually, this is actually a separate harness from the one that we are replacing. I'm not sure where this wiring harness goes to, but you can see it's burnt up too. See if we follow it up to the front. Comes over here. Oh man, where does this wiring harness go to? This is probably for the front lights and electronics, because it runs up to the front here somewhere. I mean, now looking up here, oh, light bulbs aren't even installed. Look, they're completely blown and busted up. And looking at the other side, same thing. These lights are, why are they hanging out like this though? They're not even installed, and the bulbs are busted and burned. I mean, it's pretty evident this thing wasn't a front end collision. Definitely was in some sort of accident. This is quickly becoming my worst nightmare. My second worst nightmare. Well, my third worst. I got a lot of nightmares. Anyway, I guess there's really no way around this thing. We're gonna have to pull both of these headers off, which is gonna be a real pain in the you-know-what. But if the customer's willing to pay, I guess let's do it. All right, guys, so I went ahead and I soaked the header bolts with the penetrant fluid, PB Blaster, and I let it sit for a while. So now we're gonna go ahead and see if we can unbolt the headers so that we can remove them. All right, so now that we have the headers unbolted from the top, we're gonna go ahead and raise the vehicle and get the ones from the bottom. Now it looks like I can actually pull this one right out from the bottom. There we go. Man, this thing is nasty. Now this other one, I'm not really sure if I can just pull it out. I may have to try to get this one out of the top, but if I do that, that's probably going to require the removal of the alternator. Times like this, I miss having workers. I could just tell them pull this out. Well, let's go ahead and lower the car and try to pull it from the top side. You know what? I think I may have figured out what's holding up this header. There's a ground strap right here, and that strap is going around the header, so it's keeping it from coming out. So I think if I remove that bolt for the ground strap, I might be able to pull this header out from the bottom. There's the bolt for the ground strap. Oop. Oh, there it goes. Move this ground strap out of the way. Let's see if we can finagle this thing out of there. This Might be easier if I just disconnect the clutch line. We're gonna have to bleed it anyway because we're gonna have to replace the master cylinder. Let me pop this line out. There goes the clip. Don't worry, I see where it landed. There we go. And I got that line out of the way. Whoa! She's eager to come out. There we go. What'd I tell you? All right, guys, so now that we have both of the headers removed, we can see the full extent of the damage to the wiring harness. And you can see just how much havoc and destruction these headers have put on this wiring harness. Let me get the light up in here, okay? You see all of this engine wiring harness is all cooked pretty badly. And on the other side over here where the starter motor was, you can see it kind of did the same thing here. So we have some melted connectors, melted wiring. So yeah, now the other thing is that there is another wiring harness. So apart from the engine wiring harness, now that we have all of this taken out, I can see that this harness right here that's also burned up is actually not a part of the harness that we're replacing. This is actually a separate harness. And I mean, you see this thing's also gonna need to be replaced. So now that's another issue. And actually, if I look at these wires, it kind of looks like somebody tried to twist tie them together. So this must have been an issue already. And somebody, I guess, attempted to repair this. Now, I really wasn't sure what this harness was for, so I followed it up and around. And one of the things it looks like it goes to is the wheel speed sensor over here. So apparently that wiring harness has something to do with the ABS system. I mean, it's possible that it also controls the cooling fans because the fans are up in the front over there. So, I mean, yeah, that harness is probably going to need to get replaced also. Anyways, at this point, the plan is to go ahead and wrap both of the headers with an insulation and replace this wiring harness. I'm going to see if we can find the other wiring harness. If we can't, and we're just kind of in a time crunch here because I really don't want this Corvette tying up the lift while we're looking for a wiring harness for this thing. So I may attempt to just repair the wires that are there for that harness. And of course, we're going to insulate those wires and insulate all of this stuff. All of this stuff is going to get insulated. It's going to be pushed away from the header, and the header's also going to get wrapped. So that's the plan of attack here. Now, of course, the next thing we still need to do after we do the engine wiring harness is we need to replace the clutch master cylinder and the pedal bracket, which the customer was able to find used off of the internet. So we got the clutch pedal and the bracket. Let me show you. All right, so over here on the table, we have the clutch pedal bracket. And if you remember from the first video, it was actually cracked right here. And he got this used master cylinder. So we're gonna go ahead and install this. And if you recall from the last video, this rod was completely bent. And so I kind of had a theory about what happened now. Because the way this master cylinder installs into this bracket is, if you look, this side goes up against the firewall and it's sort of a square shaped, and that's how the master cylinder installs. It's not bolted in. It has this kind of square piece around it. And so when you install this, you're supposed to shove it in like this and then turn it clockwise and it'll lock into place. So I guess my theory is that it's possible that whenever someone tried to install the master cylinder, they didn't install it correctly. They may have put it in and not fully engaged the locking tabs. Well, if it even has any locking tabs, I'm not sure. I guess it just kind of pressures itself up against it whenever you turn it. So anyways, either it was installed incorrectly and it must have slipped out of the hole, came out a little bit, and whenever somebody went to push the pedal, you know, they must have put all of their force into it, and when they pushed it, this rod must have kind of jammed itself up against the side of the bracket, and whenever they pushed the pedal hard enough, it caused it to push the master cylinder and the rod up against the bracket, and that's why the bracket ended up breaking, and that's why the rod ended up bending. I don't know if I'm explaining that very well, but that's my theory on it. So anyways, after the wiring harness is installed, we're gonna need to install this. All right, time to remove the intake manifold. All right, guys, so now that we have the intake manifold removed, you can see the connectors back here that we need to remove. It's gonna be the one for the camshaft position sensor here, and the one for the oil pressure switch right there. And there's it's supposed to be a ground strap here, but it looks like somebody had wired these two ground wires to one black and white wire, and they ran it across, and it looks like they bolted it to the chassis right there. See if I can focus in right there. They bolted it down there, so I could probably just cut this off, because that's not how this one that we got is. It actually has some terminals that I believe bolt to the back side of the head, so we'll probably just cut this off. Other than that, it looks like this harness is ready to come out. When we removed the header, I was able to get to the starter cable down here. I still need to remove it, but I did get the crankshaft position sensor connector disconnected, and everything down there is disconnected. So let me take off the terminal for the starter motor down there, and then we'll get this wiring harness out. All right, guys, so finally we have the wiring harness out. I've got them both laid on the ground here side by side, and the old one that I just pulled out of the vehicle is up here at the top of the screen, and the new one, or the used one that we purchased, is down here at the bottom. Now, there's still a few things that I need to do before I can install this harness, switch some connectors over, and mainly repair this harness over here, because if you remember, near the computer, this leg of the harness here that goes to the other module that's attached to the computer bracket is missing on this one. On this one that we purchased, they completely chopped it off. And I don't know, there's probably maybe 10 wires there that need to be spliced and reconnected. So I'm gonna have to transfer this piece of the harness over to that one. And there's a few other connectors that we need to do. But yeah, there we go. Anyways, guys, I'm gonna go ahead and end off today's video here. It's been a long day. I'm ready to go home. We got the wiring harness out of the vehicle, so in the next video, we're gonna be reinstalling it, and also probably doing the clutch pedal as well. Now, it's important to note that we're not really sure if this is gonna fix the no start condition. Replacing the harness was just step one. So once we get the harness replaced, then we can see if the vehicle starts. If it doesn't, then we still have to go through another diagnostic procedure to figure out why it doesn't start. So make sure you guys keep an eye out for that video. Like I always say, thank you guys for watching. I hope you found this video useful. I hope you found it informational, educational, entertaining. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit that notification bell, and I'll see you guys in the next one.